Hello, and welcome to this talk about designing tech tools for crisis and natural disaster relief. There are content warnings for this talk. There are mentions of natural disaster, fire, famine, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, and terrorism. Please only continue to listen if you're okay with hearing about these subjects. I'm Errol. My pronouns are they, them. I am a humanitarian designer or a human rights-centered designer. I'm also an advocate for open source design, which means the existence and the promotion of designers contributing to open source software. I've been working as a designer for 10 years and focusing on humanitarian projects for the last 7 years, most recently with open source tools. This talk focuses on work done while I was working at Ushahidi, an NGO that makes open source tools for human rights cases. In this talk, we'll be covering these topics: the background of crisis and the life cycle of a crisis to give our work context, our minimum viable product and the features of it, and what kind of automation makes sense for users within a tool within crisis times. Our field research to test our minimum viable product in Kenya. And finally, challenges and takeaways that hope to help folks listening better understand what we learned. So to go into crisis lifecycle and background, on April 25th, 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated Nepal, killing more than 9,000 people and injuring over 23,000 people. Much of the infrastructure around the country was severely damaged, leaving hundreds of thousands of people without shelter or basic necessities. Using Ushahidi's open source tools, Kathmandu Living Labs was able to map all of the health facilities in the Kathmandu Valley before the earthquake. This undoubtedly helped the relief workers' ability to deliver supplies and help save lives in that area. Ushahidi has since helped many humanitarian causes by supporting them in effectively using Ushahidi's open source tools to respond to these crises. This includes both natural disasters and human-initiated crises. On screen currently is a sample of the different projects supported over the many years and where you can see them online. From our experiences in the various crisis scenarios, we found that this statement rings true. In a crisis, discovering the needs of people who are affected is really complicated. Sometimes multiple aid organizations are going in and doing separate or combined needs assessments. Sometimes they're doing that digitally, and sometimes they're doing it paper-based. Maybe local NGOs and partners are involved, but not always. There's often this top-down approach in that we have a certain resource and we will deliver that resource to the community, but it actually might not be the resource that the community really, really needs in that time. There is often a political or diplomatic challenge and lengthy application processes to deploy foreign aid, and this can take many, many weeks or even months. A complex thing that happens within crisis is often when a second crisis happens shortly after the first. In Cyclone Idai in Mozambique, there was a second cyclone that hit a week later. So after the communities started rebuilding after the first cyclone, they were shortly challenged with a second cyclone, and they really had to quickly change their mode back to crisis response mode rather than building up capacity. And there is really often a focus off of community resilience being embedded. And this happens when aid organizations often come out of the situation within a number of weeks or months, and the community really struggles to still recover from the crisis. So in a crisis, the following cycle typically plays out. On the left-hand side, we've got a phase called before, or resilience, where community is typically operating reasonably well. People are going about their daily lives. Sometimes these communities can be really cohesive and really connected and really resilient. Sometimes they're not. They're just typical communities that don't have much cohesion. There's then in the middle a during phase where a crisis hits or a disaster hits that community. This is also called the response phase, where often things are responded to very quickly as something is happening or shortly after something has happened, as in a crisis or a disaster. On the right-hand side, you see the after phase, which is the recovery phase. This is often when people have been displaced or they're trying to repair their lives pre the disaster or pre the during phase. After a certain amount of time, depending on the different circumstances within the community, the country, and the situation, the after phase cycles back to the before phase. This could be anything from, again, months to years to tens of years to get back into the before phase experience before a crisis. Rarely, but as we saw within the Cyclone Idai case, sometimes the after phase can quickly cycle back into the during phase when another crisis hits shortly after the first. At Ushahidi, we've made a lot of tools that help with the during and response phase and the after and recovery phase, but we hadn't really tackled the before resilience phase in a formalized way. So this is what we asked ourselves at Ushahidi. Can we make something that works in the before phase and then positively affects the during and after phase, connecting up people in the different phases of the crisis to become more resilient? To go back to Nepal and the Nepal earthquake example from before, we know that this work is already being done in the before phase when it's facilitated. The effort there was led by Kathmandu Living Labs, but included many other volunteer organizations and people, individuals contributing to that effort, such as the Standby Task Force and Micromappers. They organize digital volunteers to deploy in these crises, to search social media for reports of damage and requests for help, and process and map this information and make it available to the responding agencies. There's Humanity Road, who are closing the communication gap between people and organizations during these crises, the critical communication process between people and their needs and the organizations that are trying to serve those needs. And then there's Translators Without Borders, doing the much needed translation effort in these sometimes remote and rural communities with quite specific language dialects, and translating this into often what is called a universal language, which is typically English. Based off of this example from Nepal and from Ushahidi's past crisis work, we sought to find further examples of this social community volunteer group effort and how communities band together in a crisis. And we sought to see examples of when this was happening now or happened in recent times. So what we undertook was a series of ethnographic research trips locally to each team member. We have a dispersed team across the whole world at Ushahidi. And we studied everything from the floods within southwest India, Kerala, to Birmingham, UK floods, the genocide within Rwanda and some tribal violence happening there too, California wildfires, the Belfast in Northern Ireland floods and the civil unrest that still carries on today, and Japan during the tsunami and reactor crisis. We gathered information on how communities build their resilience in the before phases of the crisis. This was everything from borrowing cups of sugar from neighbours to helping with daily tasks like going to the post office or receiving groceries and putting them away, to shoveling driveways during heavy snow, and also paying for expensive medical care when the injured community member could not. So when communities come together to really support members of the community when they cannot help themselves, when they cannot cover things like expensive costs. We also looked into the formal and semi-formal emergency services to see whether there was a connection or overlap in their response. Here we can see a whiteboard, maps, computer screens, and communication devices. This is the tech a lot of the semi-formal emergency services were using when doing community resilience work. The semi-formal organizations were often made up of people that were either current or former Blue Light Services or emergency services staff, or they were members of the community with a particular interest in resilience, or that inherent interest in building resilience. We called these people, as a set of users, organized and resilient, but not digital first. They use a lot of the organization systems borrowed from the formal emergency services. But as we looked into this more, this approach was not community embedded, as in communities of regular citizens and regular people weren't using these methods when self-organizing outside of an emergency services knowledge base. Communities were using tools like Olio and Helpful Peeps, Neighbourly, Facebook groups, and Google Drives, as well as in-person meetings. But again, these were closed groups and hard to discover if you weren't actively facing a crisis or interested in resilience. To cover a little bit about what each of these applications do, each of these services do, Olio is a system where people can share items of food or non-food items that they're no longer in use of or wanting. Neighbourly is a system where people can find out where to volunteer and connect up with different volunteer groups and community projects and NGOs locally. The Neighbourly, the Helpful Peeps app is similar to Neighbourly in that it connects up different people with different skills, different abilities, different access to maybe equipment, and looked at connecting up those people to help each other. So after doing this local research, we decided to focus on two key users that were community-based rather than emergency services-based. We had our organized but not digital or discoverable. These could have been part of the semi-formal emergency services, but they often were interested in other ways to get community resilience experience. And we had the digital but not connected to a real life community. So these were the people maybe using digital tools already or very keen on using a digital or technology tool to get better connected to community. But they didn't have that real in-person community to connect to. So these two users really fit with our community resilience focus, and also Ushahidi's core organizational aims to empower communities and give them problem-solving tools. And we really did find that having a real-life connection alongside a digital solution was essential. And it really helped, the real life connection helped enable the usefulness of a digital tool in order to build resilience. These two aspects of resilience, the in-person community and the connection to community, as well as the digital service tool, was a really key connection point that we discovered through this initial research. To move on to the MVP and our exploration into automation, we had some initial post-research questions that helped narrow down our problem statement, and we narrowed these down to 4 fundamental questions. We had a question of, why do you help? So what are the deep motivations for helping members of your community? What is the risk? How do helpers and requesters mitigate risks to their safety within these voluntary exchanges? And that small choices matter. So what are the micro decisions you make within a voluntary exchange of this nature within a crisis? This was the process that we went through to build the MVP. We had research and development scope, fundraising, 5 iterations of design and development work. We did the fieldwork prep, QA testing, the in-country fieldwork and reporting. And we did this all within the span of 4 months. Here are some of the flows of the prototype where we began to explore automation and matching. Here you can see a series of screens about helping others, discovering others in your area, and then also requesting help from other people in your area with a set of different criteria configurable by the person offering help or requesting help. We then started looking into automation, and we really believed that automation offered a new way of helping ease the pre-existing problems that official crisis relief organizations have. And it also allows new and existing people within the communities a chance to discover those outside of their current circles, thus extending the potential reach of recovery and resilience post-disaster, pre-disaster throughout the whole process. So it builds upon that real in-person aspect of community resilience. Within the MVP, this manifested within a series of screens which were the community matching. So here we can see a series of screens where people are asking for help, a general help request, match is being located. You're offered a match that matches a set of different criteria that were configurable within the system by the person requesting the help and also the person offering the help. And then a series of status screens about whether you've confirmed that help or accepting that help and pending the other person's acceptance. To take a little bit of time to cover some of the other key features of what we then called Dispatcher, we wanted to position this product as a peer-to-peer, community-led needs assessment and matching recommendation system for these crisis scenarios. And there were several key things that we needed to build in order to make this work for the communities that we were targeting and the communities that we wanted to serve. This isn't a full list, but these are some of the key things to draw out within this talk. We had a series of different categories and tags, and this really helped with the matching process, as well as helped the dispatcher system learn what was being asked within a certain crisis scenario or within a certain community. But that in turn helped the community understand what was being asked for and offered as well. We had some people receiving and some people offering, and some people both offering and receiving. To require both in this system would actually isolate those that needed help but couldn't offer the same back, and vice versa. There cannot be quid pro quo here within this scenario where people are battling crisis. In future crises, people that maybe were helped could then offer help, and people that were offering help could be helped. A giver and receiver are not always constants, and sometimes they flux amongst different crises, and we needed to account for that. Safety and being anonymous was really crucial for our system, especially those with vulnerable circumstances. And the ability to decline anonymously really, really helped with this. Building a sense of synchronous trust via chat functions also gave the individuals using the system the ability to make judgment calls about whether they wanted to be helped or whether they wanted to offer that help to a certain person. This also built some complexity into our system, but we'll go into that in the challenges and learning section. Now on to the field research, where we took our product out into communities to test whether it worked. But first, to talk a little bit about why we chose Nairobi in Kenya. We worked mainly within informal settlements like Kibera and Kiole within Nairobi in Kenya. Informal settlements are often more commonly known as slum areas within these countries. And within these slum areas or these informal settlements, people experience many, many crises, from overarching national crises to individual, dedicatedly located crises. So everything from crowded housing leading to fires spreading quickly because a lot of cooking is done outdoors and a lot of the building materials are quite flammable, to historical and political and tribal-based conflicts that still play out in really complex ways today that many people in these areas really want to find peaceful alternatives to. And this is why we chose this location. We could really learn a lot from these communities experiencing these crises on almost a daily basis. To move into the challenges and takeaways section of this talk, we learned many, many things when working with the communities in Kibera and Kiole. But one of the key things that we learned was around the shared affinity groups creating foundations of trust. So what we discovered was that many, many people had lots of different things that they described their identity with, and what we called this affinity. So we had one example of a case where there was a new mum and she had recently given birth in the last few months. And she was much more likely to want to help and be helped by the people that had also given birth within the recent months. And she had a particular mum and baby group that she was part of. And she really trusted these people because they had this shared affinity. They all had children within this same time period. There were people that she'd maybe known longer. She'd known her neighbours longer than these mum and baby groups. But she didn't trust her neighbours as much as the people within the mum and baby groups because they didn't share the same affinity. They didn't have this bond of being mums with babies within that same time period. So there was like a foundation of trust that was built through this shared affinity. And this was really replicated across all of our different users that we tested with and all the different users that used our MVP. One really interesting fact to mention within affinity groups and creating trust is that each individual is not only part of one affinity group. So the mum and the mum and baby groups, they had other affinities that they trusted more readily than, say, people that they'd known a long time, like their neighbours. So this particular mum was also very trusting of a similar group that shared her love of travel, which had nothing to do with the mum and baby groups, and it had nothing to do with how long maybe she'd lived next door to somebody, but had everything to do with this community of people that really shared a deep interest in something that she had a deep interest in. So there's a lot of trust to be found in shared affinity and shared values. Another key learning was around tone and language and choice and how to use chat to help mitigate risk. We asked a lot of the users how they chose and how they would decide to help another person or be helped by another person. And a lot of suggestions were coming in from the people that we talked to. So sometimes users asked for recommendations from other helpers for the ability to review helpers. And here we came across some dangerous bias problems and some dangerous issues around how we choose our interactions online through different functions. However, when users already started using the chat functions, and when they started interacting with these key ways of communicating, they were able to build different structures of trust within this exchange. And often this chat function enabled people to build trust across community and social barriers when they allowed themselves to participate in an authentic chat exchange. But still, we had a lot of problems to solve after the initial MVP research learnings from Kenya to solve these problems about how people rely on bias around language use and slang use and how people are dressed within their profile pictures or whether they even look real within their profile pictures. Another key aspect was, what is machine learning and automation to people? So one of the key learnings about trying to build in an automation process or a system that seems intelligent for the users of it It's really trying to understand how people want that machine to learn and how they want that automation to display to them. And what we really found out here was that building an algorithm really to learn and to do something really intelligent was really only as good as the logical reasons that the people want from them. So to put this in an example, we assumed that distance and location and different demographics, as well as skill matching, were going to be some of the most important criteria for how people wanted to be matched with other people. But as we learned through working through things like the affinities and how people connected through chat, we really learned that people wanted to be matched and they wanted the machine to do its automation learning process based on how likely they were to bond with that person or build a bond with that person along these shared affinity groups or these shared values. And really the assumptions that we were making about how to build a set of automation matching criteria were fundamentally built on things that we assumed that people would find really interesting that a machine could do, or really easy maybe that also a machine could do, because we thought that people were really interested in having people really close by to them, so distance being a key factor. But we actually found out when working with the people that were using our system that people were very willing to go very long distances to help somebody when they had a very clear bond with that person, a clear bond that was matched within the dispatcher system. So we really had to fundamentally, coming back from the research trip, we really had to fundamentally rethink what we wanted our automation matching process to do for people within these crisis scenarios, and how we served people best when building our systems that learned how to respond based on the human's behavior. To wrap things up, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. We haven't had nearly enough time to go into depth on all the different challenges and learnings from the Dispatcher project. But if you're curious about any more of the learnings from Dispatcher, you're maybe interested in where the conversation about reviews went around profiles and how do you actually facilitate that exchange of items and offering within an extreme crisis scenario. These are all amazing questions that I would be happy to answer in any way possible. So please get in touch, and thank you very much for listening.